22 players on a field for 90 minutes kicking a ball. Simple, and yet football has become a mirror for some of the best and worst parts of humanity. It's a global language, and it can deliver a sense of belonging and identity, even an almost spiritual experience. But the game can also divide us deeply, stoking rivalries and us versus them loyalties. The sport can feel hyper-commercialized, and the best talent often drains from the global south to the west. I'm Imran Garda, and this is the Doha Debates podcast.
I think the English Premier League has been, I don't know what anybody else would say, but has been quite advanced in terms of accommodating Muslim players. For example, during the fast, actually letting players fast and letting them break their fast during the game.
Premier League now, every game begins with an absurd display of third-rate pyrotechnics from little black boxes on wheels that produce flames. It's like, what has this got to do with anything? I find this absolutely absurd and demeaning, like we're at Disneyland or at some sort of second-rate theme park. Oh, fire, excitement, hell. It's like, who are you kidding? This is pathetic. It's pathetic.
What politics cannot do, I believe that football managed to do, and managed to recognize us as a full member with full rights because of football. So that is the recognition that football gives. I don't feel or see anything else could give compared to the football that given us as Palestinians.
Our debate today, what kind of identity does football give us? Okay, I'd like to welcome our guest, David Goldblatt, a sports writer and author of The Ball is Round, a global history of football. I've read a lot of your work over the years, so pleasure having you on the program. Hani Thaljieh, co-founder of Women's Football Palestine. Good to have you with us, Hani. And Tony Karon, editorial lead at AJ Plus and former Time Magazine senior editor. Tony, welcome. Thank you all for joining us. We're here in Buenos Aires. I guess one of the simplest ways to put this is that in my household, I mentioned I'm going to Buenos Aires. Girls, what do you want? And the first order was, I want a Messi 10 shirt. The other daughter was like, Maradona 10. And the third said, nah, something a bit different. I don't know, just surprise me, something a bit different, maybe a little bit more hipster. So maybe it's going to be like a Raquelme or a Pablo Aimar River Plate or something. That's all I said. I didn't say I was even going to be discussing football. I said, I'm just going to Buenos Aires. It was synonymous with football and with these icons and these number 10s. What is it, Tony, about this game? And is it the same wherever you go?
Yes. And the reason is I think that this game has been globalized to the point that because of satellite television, I think this really begins in the 1990s, that it facilitates a global civil society sharing in real time a set of experiences that are unprecedented in our ability to share them. So when 1.5 billion people watch the World Cup together in real time, that was never possible, 40, 50 years ago, that essentially everybody is gasping at the same moment. Everybody is cheering. Everybody is elated. It creates a real sense that, time and space have been compacted in the era of globalization. Of course, that's about money that doesn't exist separately from a world economy that we know. But it really strikes me that, for example, I grew up in South Africa listening to BBC World Service report, audio live commentary on Liverpool games. Today, 300 million people in Africa watch the Premier League every weekend live. So I think the reason that your daughters have the sense of football as the global stage, the global performance of something exciting, something they care about, something meaningful, is a product of that. I think 40 or 50 years ago, they would have been unlikely to be making those requests.
And let me then ask you, Hani, so growing up in Bethlehem, in the occupied West Bank, the city is famous for other sort of civilizational, cultural, religious reasons. In the occupied West Bank, Palestinian girl in Bethlehem, tell me what that connection to football was like. Who were your heroes? Where did you watch it? Did you watch it on TV? Were you listening on the radio? What was it like?
It was football was the way in Palestine. Growing up in Bethlehem for me, to get out to the outside world and liberate myself from all the constraints, from the political, cultural, social barriers at all levels. It was just a hobby at the beginning, like when you are 7 years old, you don't know what is beyond football. But at that time, it was just a hobby that, accelerated quickly to become about identity and fighting for justice, equality, human rights, women's rights, and also showing another narrative about the Palestinian people, not a message about destruction, death, despair, but about resilience, about celebration of life, and about identity through football. At that time, I didn't have heroes. It was difficult to look up to someone, specifically as a woman, because at my time, I was the only girls playing in the streets of Bethlehem. So it was really hard to connect with a role model that I want to look up to her and become like her one day. So my models were the big footballers, legends, like Pelé, Brazilian Ronaldo, Maradona, and all of them. Of course, I also struggled to look up to women's names as well at that time, because it was not as popular as today, women's football. And therefore, my role model or my hero was my mom in the house, because she was the one secretly trying to allow me to play football in the narrow streets of Bethlehem. And from there, the struggle started on how to continue playing this beautiful game and take it to another level.
David, what is it about this game? What is it about what it does to us?
It's worth thinking about, what do we actually mean by football? We say it as if we all actually have a shared conception of what this social phenomenon is. I'm not sure that we do. So let's unpack it for a moment. First of all, it's just a game that people play. And that's partly why it's so unbelievably popular, because so many billions of people are actually just playing it in all its many formats, not just 11-a-side, 5-a-side, 7-a-side, in the street, on grass, on sand. It comes in a multiplicity of different forms. And then how do we consume it once we've played it? Well, on the one hand, football is a soap opera. It's a multiple character, multiple episode, endless set of intersecting storylines where the barriers between what happens in the game and what happens in the real world are endlessly permeable. And like all good soap opera, football delivers every single week a cliffhanger. Will we be better next week? Will we score next week? Will we lose next week? That's what keeps us coming back to every soap opera in the world. So it is with football. But more extraordinary than any soap opera, because soap operas are not filmed in front of an audience. This is a soap opera that is always happening in front of a live audience. And that transforms the meaning of the event. It's not merely a piece of kind of ludic storytelling. This is a form of public theatre in which the collectivity is commentator, chorus, participant. That's an extraordinary phenomenon, and there are very few places left in a super individualized world where we actually believe that collective action matters. A space in which we actually feel that we are more than the sum of our parts. And football delivers that experience in the most kind of extraordinary, emotional, delirious fashion. So you've got all of that going for you. And then you've got the game itself, because there might have been, perhaps in another kind of universe, a world in which some other game, perhaps occupied this social space. But football, I think, has a number of really significant features to it as a game that make it so utterly compelling and so emotionally engaging. And the first is favourites in football are invariably cast by the bookmakers at longer odds than in, say, baseball or basketball. The favourites win less often. The role of chance, of uncertainty, is so much greater in football. The game can just turn, as we know, on a few moments, on a single mistake. And that produces hope. I mean, I support a small team back in England called Bristol Rovers.
I thought you were going to say Tottenham.
Yeah.
Because he also supports Tottenham.
Tottenham are my kind of historic team, inherited as a North London Jew from my father and my grandfather, and it keeps me interested in the Premier League. But really where my heart is Bristol Rovers,
Right.
which is just down the road from me. And I can assure you, if you went to Bristol Rovers for an afternoon, anybody would understand this game is not about winning. It's, because most of the time we lose, and it's not about beauty because most of the time it's very ugly, but it is about possibility. It's about collectivity. It's about solidarity. And for that to be emotionally charged by a game that is relentless. I mean, this is why baseball and cricket could never be the game of modernity. And don't get me wrong, I love both of those games. But their sequential nature, their stop-start nature, does not provide the kind of emotional adrenaline charge that football delivers. And then you add to that with football the whole space of, I suppose, permissible aggression. Football is a game in which you are actually allowed a lot of physicality, within limits. And that generates uncertainty, it generates conflict, it generates excitement in a way that none of those games can reproduce. So you put together the multifaceted character of the game, the nature of the crowds and the crowd cultures that have developed over the last 150 years, and then the dynamics of the game itself. It's no surprise that this is the world's game, and one which we are able to append an enormous variety of identities, political ideas and emotional experiences to. It has the most extraordinary kind of polyvalence in a way that other sports just do not deliver.
We've scattered a lot of leaves. Let me pick up a few. Let's hold on to them, investigate them closely. This idea of a theatre, this idea almost of a sacred space. Tony, you're a Liverpool fan, as you mentioned. As a United fan, when I heard "You'll Never Walk Alone" in a crowd full of Liverpool supporters, it stirred me. And then I felt, no, that's like the other side. I shouldn't be feeling, I had this dissonance. I was feeling like, no, I shouldn't like this, but it was moving me. It was as if I was a believer in one religion and I went into a church of another and I thought I shouldn't be here. Right? Is that your outlet? Like, I mean, in a sort of basic, tribal, primal way, is that your church?
Yes, 100%. And weirdly, it's a televangelical church for most of our lives. And actually, probably most fans of any particular team these days are mostly watching that on television. But the bond that you're talking about, where Liverpool has this anthem, "You'll Never Walk Alone." It's an expression of solidarity. I mean, it's kind of got a weird backstory in that it's a Rodgers and Hammerstein show tune that Jerry and the Pacemakers record, a Liverpool band records a cover version of in 1965. And Bill Shankly, our legendary manager, said, this is popular. Let's put it on the tannoy, as they called the speaker system back then. And hence is born this hymn. But I think... I was involved in the liberation struggle in South Africa. Singing was an absolutely integral part of mobilization in South Africa. We sung our way to freedom. If you were marching down a street and there was a line of cops, at the end of that street, and things could get very, very nasty, that sense of the crowd's bond and the power it generates, a spiritual bond that kind of lifts people to imagine, as what David was saying, the collective being greater than the sum of its parts. That was very, very powerful there. But I hate to sort of, it sounds like you're demeaning something that meaningful by comparing it with football. But I do see that in a football stadium, people are singing hymns. people are behaving in a way that people behave in religious ceremonies, at least in the Christian tradition and in the Jewish tradition. Actually, I'm not sure. I can't speak for Islam that communal singing is part of that tradition. But I think it's very, very powerful. And almost if you go into the history of the game, where certainly in Europe, certainly in England and parts of Western Europe, that sort of coincidence with mass football being, to some extent occurring at more or less the same time as the Industrial Revolution. People are moving to the cities. People are moving off the land, or moving off communities where the village church was maybe the center of kind of social life. And they're not replacing that in the cities with, another small church. But suddenly they're going to a football match every weekend, and they're sharing an experience, a bond, a sense of this community is bonded. A religious community is bonded by their relationship with the Almighty, but also by their relationship with one another in service of that bond with the Almighty. And I think that sense and that feeling definitely comes through. You'll never walk alone. You're all together. And for most football clubs, I think, and perhaps you could make a parallel with the Catholic Church in the pre-medieval era. Most of your experience as a congregation is collective suffering, right?
As a United fan, I know
exactly.
all about that.
And actually, Liverpool, we can feel for you because we had 20 years in the wilderness before Klopp came along. But I mean, I think that's real. It's like you go to games and you're not choosing a team because they're winning. They're choosing a team that whenever you chose it, it became embedded. I mean, in David's case, as you say, in England, you pass down. You're inheriting an identity with the club. But yes, I mean, I think in many ways, being a fan of a football team is a lifelong thing. And some of the experience is devotional and spiritual, the bond, the way that, the goosebumps come when you're watching a game on television, thousands of miles away, and you'll never walk alone is ringing out. And it's like you can't help feel that way. The one last thing I want to say about your fears of cross-pollination, I think there's something very beautiful about the way fans recognize one another's integrity as communities of devotion to an idea and to the principle of solidarity. So, I'm thinking back to the time of Hillsborough. So, when 93 Liverpool fans die in a stadium crash in a stadium in Sheffield in an FA Cup semi-final. And I remember seeing the TV clips at the time from the following, a few days later, from stadiums in Barcelona, in Milan, of a number of other places, of fans singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." Fans who didn't speak English were singing this expression of solidarity. And, I think it reminds me of things like in the Tahrir Square rebellion, when the Christians were praying, or the Muslims were praying, and the Christians or the Muslims stood around them to protect the sacred space. This idea of a sacred spectacle that you respect. It might not be your own, but I think you're okay. Like getting goosebumps when we're singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." You'll be all right.
So football is a religion.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, it's fascinating how many people around the world connect to it on different levels, for identity, for liberation, for solidarity, for coming together. It's just fascinating. And in Palestine, this is a symbol, actually, for resilience. It's a symbol for liberation. Although, we support international teams. For example, when Barcelona and Real Madrid play in Palestine, the whole country goes upside down. Yeah. They forget all the adversaries, all the challenges, all the bombing, all the destruction, and they meet in a place where they could have a small TV, just cheer up for Barcelona or Real Madrid. So it's just fascinating how such a power can bring billions of people together and unite them in one simple match with one simple game.
So we have Bristol Rovers, Liverpool, Manchester United, unfortunately. Who do you support?
I like Athletic Bilbao.
That's fascinating. Tell me why.
I started to connect with them quite years ago because of the values and of the club. They focus a lot on local players, local footballers, so they support local talents, and they are not with buying football players and spending a lot of money in bringing them to the club. So
and,
they
and,
encourage...
and for clarity, they're in the Basque region of Spain,
in the
autonomous
Basque
Basque
region,
region, yes.
absolutely, and they have been successful until today. They are still in the Champions League, and they play in a good level, and they just kept the narrative, kept the story that we encourage and we support national talent, national heroes, because what is a football team without their local heroes? And not only that, but also on the other side, the Basques are also like supporting Palestine, and they relate to our suffering and the independence that we are fighting for. So at different levels, like I'm connecting with this club, and it's also, their women's football is also good, and men's football is really good. They play also in the, some of the players play in the Spanish national team. So it's brilliant to see how fascinating that the encouragement of the local talent, but also the social work that they do in their foundations and the support they do to refugees and different topics. So the social impact and the legacy of clubs like really connect to me a lot. Not
So
only
you saw a lot of yourself in them.
Correct.
David, talk to me a bit about that. How people see themselves across nations, across borders, across oceans. They see themselves in teams and identify with them.
Good question. Before I do, can I just say, I think there's a key phrase that we're missing so far, which is ritual. That's such an important component of the football experience, is that you're with the same people at the same time, in the same place, doing the same things, and it is that imbues the experience with some sort of spiritual and greater significance. And I think it's really important for us to think about what is the nature of that ritual. And that ritual, I think it's really important because that ritual has, over the last 150 years, overwhelmingly been made from the bottom up. Football in particular, you know, it is the crowds and the fans who have created that ritual space and that social and spiritual significance. And we live in an era where the powers that be, whether it be UEFA, FIFA, the clubs themselves, are endlessly meddling with the nature of the ritual. And it is not theirs.
How are they meddling?
Well, for example, the Premier League now, every game begins with an absurd display of third-rate pyrotechnics from little black boxes on wheels that produce flames. It's like, what has this got to do with anything? I find this absolutely absurd and demeaning, like we're at Disneyland or at some sort of second-rate theme park. Oh, fire, excitement, hell. It's like, who are you kidding? This is pathetic. It's pathetic. The same with the music that gets played, right? Why is it always music that nobody actually wants to listen to? You know, similarly, I mean, I personally can't bear the whole kind of player escort, as they're called, where the little kids get brought in. It's like, we're about to have a battle here. Why are we pretending we're at a kindergarten? Oh, it's so cute. It's a nice experience for them. I personally absolutely can't bear it. I think it's demeaning and infantilizing for everyone. So I think it's really important. I mean, you know, the Reformation, you know, and the wars of religion were fought over the nature of ritual and the litany. These things are really, really important.
Okay, so you bring up an interesting point, Tony, the other side to all of this, going into battle, as we say. We spoke of identity. Now, historically, we've seen the sort of Rangers Celtic in Glasgow, one historically Protestant, one historically Catholic. I mean, there's deep sociological and historical roots here, but for simplicity's sake, going to the Glasgow derby historically, the Rangers fans would tend to be unionist, the Celtic fans would tend to be Irish Republican, and then it sort of expands beyond that as well. The Celtic fans are more likely to have Palestine flags and the Rangers fans Israel flags, and so on and so forth. It opens the door to asking about the arguably ugly side of all of this. How ugly is the ugly side of it all?
Just to clarify something about there's a religious dimension as in the communities happen to have different confessional allegiances. But the reason for the conflict in Ireland, to begin with, is not over whether the communion wafer is literally or just figuratively the blood and body of Christ, right? That the difference between the Protestant and Catholic versions of the Mass and its meaning. The conflict is about power. The conflict is about who is in power and communal power. It's a communal identity. And it's historical, its relationship to British power, et cetera, et cetera. So it has a religious dimension, a religious overlay, but the origin doesn't lie in religion. The origin relies in power and how power is organized. So in the case of Glasgow, the Catholic working class in Glasgow are Irish immigrants, right, historically. That's why the Rangers fans sing "The famine is over, why don't you go home?" As in, they came during the famine, and there's this overlay. Again, maybe both communities embrace opposite identities. Because there's this power struggle, they embrace opposite identities in Ireland, and they connect. I mean, in the 1980s, the Celtic Ultras were basically being recruited by the Provos in Ireland. The Ulster paramilitaries were recruiting, among Rangers hardmen. There was a real sense of, the Rangers fans would be singing songs about the Battle of the Boyne, or singing about Bobby Sands and mocking the hunger strikers and so on. So there's this real overlay. Obviously, Irish nationalism is very historically aligned with Palestine for very good reason. Certainly, the British literally sent the same military unit to suppress the Palestinian uprising that begins in 1936 as they deployed to suppress the Irish national rebellion. So there's this very, strong connection. Celtic fans are flying the Palestinian flag. That means Rangers fans fly the Israeli flag. So I think, is that ugly? Is that the ugly side? Yes, it can be ugly.
Is it a harmless display?
Well, that's the point, is it can actually be a harmless outlet for these kind of residual identities. I mean, the lyrics are terrible. Like, we're up to our knees in Fenian blood, as the Rangers fans would be singing. But nobody's actually, there's not a massacre, there's not a battle. So is it a fetish that actually allows the expression of these historic rivalries? You see, maybe it comes close to kicking off sometimes when Balkan teams play one another, and
Like
Xherdan
Switzerland
Shaqiri
and
scores and they
Kosovo.
make yes, exactly, the Albanian double-headed eagle, and UEFA freaks out because that maybe is a little too live. And the first fists exchanged in the Yugoslav Civil War is basically a Dynamo Zagreb versus Red Star Belgrade match where everything kicks off. The fans are attacking one another, the players, etc. But in the main, I would say it's probably, yes, it's a receptacle of historical identities that always have a us and them dimension, like nations. There's always who we are and who we're not, and who they are and we're not them. But it can be relatively harmless as an outlet. But yeah, it can. The Tiger militia, who did so many war crimes, and the Serb nationalist militia against Bosnians, against Croats, they were recruited from among the Red Star Belgrade Ultras.
Yeah.
So you can see how
Arkan's Tigers.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not answering the question either yes
Okay,
or no.
let me make it a direct question. Is football a substitute for violence? And there are those who argue that could be a good thing, because it gets the emotions out. Is it a substitute for violence?
Yes, it's a substitute for a physical aggression, for giving vent to giving vent to aggression at the expense of pain, inflicting pain on others, because maybe there's no real pain involved in the best case scenarios.
Thaljieh?
For me, I think it prevents violence if it's regulated and monitored and respected. Because for many people and children all around the world, football was the tool to bring children away from extremism, away from violence, away from the streets, away from, all these societal tragedies and habits that could influence children because of traumas, because of anger, because of many other factors. So in my case, for example, football was a tool to get the children away from violence, away from anger, because there's a lot of anger you grew up with growing up in an apartheid, growing up in an occupation. And how to direct your anger, nobody tells you, because nobody explains how can you control your feelings, how can you express what you are going through within such context that knowing tomorrow might not be possible, or unpredictable, insecure situations. So football in that context was the best and only tool to get you out of those thoughts or those tragedies or those situations, because on the football pitch we are all equal, even if the system is not. And that was the thing for many children all around the world, because I see from my experience going to slums, going to the favelas, going to refugee camps, and see the power that football has in just bringing those people together and those children, giving them opportunities, access to sport, access to a safe place to like just play and forget about all the tragedies, all the traumas, is fascinating. And that I relate that I wouldn't say it's the ugly face of football. I would say there are issues in football, definitely. When money is involved, politics is involved, hooligans is involved.
We're going to get to money and politics.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to that.
So,
It's coming soon.
So it has that side, but it depends how it's regulated. Who are the leaders for it? How can policies be implemented and regulated at all levels? So for me, I believe that this enormous power of football to get away from violence, with the examples that I have also been working on, for example, when we organized under 20 Women's World Cup in Papua New Guinea, violence is huge there. More than 80% of women are subjected to violence at all levels, including rape, including everything in that direction. And how one message of football just helped to try to, educate the youth there with #EndViolence message, and to see how the collective collaboration between entities like UN Women, UNICEF, Oceania Football Association, government bodies, to ensure that they come all together for one collective message: end violence, train the volunteers, embrace it in stadiums, educate the coaches, the referees, everyone involved. It can show you how an impact could happen after just the match finishes. So for me, I don't focus about the competition per se, about who wins and who loses, which is beautiful because everyone wants to know. But I focus on the legacy that is left behind. What changes have football done in societies at large? How it impacted the lives of so many people, and how it opened doors for those people who would never even dream about an opportunity.
Thanks for sharing that about Papua New Guinea. David, is football a substitute for violence?
No.
Why not?
Because I think the violence is already, it's just happening. It's not substituting anything. I mean, let's take the example of Argentina, where over the last 20 or 25 years, there have probably been at least 100 homicides associated with football, probably 350 across Latin America as a whole. Is this about football? No, this is about the drugs trade, and this is about the intersection of organized fandom with the globalized drugs trade, particularly since the war on drugs smashed the Colombian cartels in the 1990s. And of course, everything just moves to Uruguay and Argentina, and people are actually fighting over who gets to sell drugs and who gets to be in charge of stuff. So football creates a space in which people can collectively organize, but actually the roots of the violence are somewhere else. And it just seems to me, if you create a space in which people can collectively organize and experience joy and solidarity and pleasure and wonder, which is, of course, what football does, well, you simultaneously open the other door to other possibilities. I mean, that's the nature of human societies. That's not about football itself. You know, these things exist outside of football.
But there are those Bertrand Russell used to famously say you need to have more sort of semi-violent sports so that people will then not go to war.
Yeah, I don't really buy that argument. People don't go to war because they've got violent urges inside them. They go there because it's in the interests of their ruling classes and their military-industrial complexes. War and violence is a product of state policy and international relations, and the idea that the outcome of Tottenham versus Arsenal is shaping the international state system is, forgive me, a little naive. Football is, and any sport is not producing the violence and the opposition. That exists elsewhere. We are incredibly lucky that we have a social phenomena that allows us to experience and display an entire variety of collective identities and emotions experiences. And, if you open up to the possibility of that, you also open up to the possibility of violence and conflict. But football's not producing it. The problem is created elsewhere.
I absolutely agree with David about the problem being created elsewhere. I want to add another situation in which people go to war, which is they're oppressed by colonial violent regimes in which there is no peaceful road for them to free themselves, and they choose national liberation wars. And I think the example that comes to mind, I really want to invoke C.L.R. James, the great cricket writer, who said, "What do they of cricket know who only cricket know?" Which, as Honey's saying, you can't actually understand what's happening on the field if you don't understand what's happening off the field in the society in which this game is being played. And he's talking about cricket as a vehicle for symbolic liberation. He's talking about West Indies, Caribbean nations beating the British at their own game as a statement, an identity statement of victory and of negating the the values that the British claim gives them the right to rule over others. So, beautiful book. If you ever get a chance, Beyond the Boundary, just describing the square cut and its meaning in the symbolic language of anti-colonialism. The example I want to refer to, though, is Algeria, because I think that's a very, very powerful story where essentially France is violently colonizing Algeria, and it's telling Algerians, you are not a nation. You are part of France. You are part of us. You're under us. You're second-class citizens of France, but you are part of France. And if you think about it, as there's the great British historian Eric Hobsbawm says, nowhere is the imagined community of the nation more real than in the form of 11 named players on a football field, right? Like if you think about basically when do French people perform their Frenchness? Other than when Les Bleus are playing and they're in a bar and they've painted or in a stadium, they've painted their faces. When do they sing their national anthem other than when Les Bleus is playing? I'm talking about the mass of the population, not, the politicians and so on. So collective imagination made real in the form of football. So basically the FLN, the Algerian Liberation Movement, is like, wait a minute, there are 23 players currently in France, playing in France in French leagues, and some of them, most notably Rachid Mehloufi, are playing in the French national team that's going to the 1958 World Cup. And the Algerian underground goes, you know what, let's get these guys out. They smuggle them out. They risk a lot of, the players themselves are risking jail, torture. They're risking a lot of their underground political resources in order to spirit these players out of France. Mehloufi is in the French World Cup squad. Suddenly he's gone and he pops up. I think it's in Tunisia that they set up, and they create an Algerian national team. Mm-hmm. But there's no Algerian independence yet. There's no Algerian state. The idea, imagine yourselves a nation, begins with football. It's like, yes, we are real. Algeria is a thing. We're a people. We have a flag. We have a shared history, destiny, etc. So I think that's a very powerful example of, a different proximity of war. And
let's ask somebody who represented a country that's not yet officially a country that people would hope to be a country.
Yes.
How did it feel for you to represent Palestine on the field when Palestine as a rubber-stamped nation state at the UN and a free Palestine does not exist in reality yet?
I still felt a lot of pride and a lot of identity that I didn't have it off the pitch, but on the pitch. I felt proud, and I felt we love life regardless, and we want to show that we have a team, we have talent, we have hobbies, and we have an identity to represent, we have a story to tell. And all those emotions, they came together once the Palestinian national anthem is played, regardless who recognize you or not. On the pitch, we felt recognized. We felt our dignity is back to us. Our identity is represented. And that's what the Palestinian national team represents, whether the men's team or the football, the women's team. Just recently, Palestine was almost going to qualify for the FIFA World Cup when they played with Oman, and they missed the chance to go for another 2 matches to qualify us. But how people cheered up for their team, for national team, just to be there and to play and to compete, regardless of a genocide that's happening at the same time, is just unbelievable. Like, it gets you all the emotion together. You cry, you feel every single part in your body for your country, for the national anthem, for the representation, for the liberation, for the identity that we looked for so many years that we couldn't find it, but I found it on the football pitch. And the same with my teammates and the representation of national teams at all levels. So that's where football is really historic. That's where football gives identity when it's not given by politics, by countries. Football was on the map. Palestine was on the map, on the football map, already in the 20s, but again was recognized in 1998 by FIFA. But until today, we are not on the political map. And that shows a lot for me as a Palestinian, but for many others, that what politics cannot do, I believe that football managed to do, and managed to recognize us as a full member with full rights because of football. So that is the recognition that football gives. I don't feel or see anything else could give compared to the football that given us as Palestinians.
And I want to suggest a lot of us feel that. It's not just Palestinians, of course. Palestinians are feeling this much more profoundly and much more deeply. But allies and supporters beyond are looking at moments like that and like, yeah, that's fantastic. And that's an emotional as well as a political thing. And I think in this conversation about identity and opposition and violence, we're missing out the possibility of less tribal notions of identity, of the possibility of universalism. I mean, at a very trivial sense, if you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, Liverpool fans 1 week would go to Liverpool, and the next week when there's no game at Anfield, quite a few would go down to Goodison Park and watch Everton, and vice versa. The same in Bristol. You watch Bristol City 1 week, you go and watch Bristol Rovers the next week, and I do the same. I go and watch Bristol City sometimes, partly so I can see some good football. But it's also because I don't feel tribal. We kind of take tribalism as the norm. And not merely the norm, but as a kind of mark of moral and personal authenticity rather than monomania. And I think there's a lot to be said for an attitude to football that is much more universalistic. My tribe is football and humanity.
Yes.
Not in the end Bristol Rovers. I just really love football, and it doesn't matter what stadium I walk into or who's playing. I mean, as a Tottenham supporter, I actually love Arsenal. Because what is the meaning of being a Tottenham supporter without Arsenal, right? Where's the grit? Where's the fun? Where's the opposition? In the end, we're all just much, much bigger, more complicated people.
Like the Joker tells Batman, what would I do without you?
Well, exactly.
You complete me.
Well, exactly. I mean, I might make an exception for Manchester City, but and I think we've got into a very weird mindset, certainly in the United Kingdom, but I think more widely that the only authentic form of football support is one team for life, never changing, hate the opposition, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's cool for some people, you want to operate like that, but there's no way that that can be the only way of engaging with football or indeed anything else. I think there is for all the talk of violence and opposition, there is also the profound possibility of universalism, of a kind of wider human solidarity.
Yeah.
Okay. Tony, is today's society sort of reflected by what we see in football, particularly when it comes to tribalism?
Yeah, but much more than that. I think, that's a very, I think the tribalism in football is historic and it's evolved. I feel very much like David. I support multiple teams besides my own at any points. And, the World Cup comes along. Who do I support at the World Cup? Well, South Africa is very rarely there. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I don't get excited about the U.S. men's national team. I support a club in England, but I don't really like England as a national setup. But, there are all sorts of players. There's, in Africa, we get behind whichever African team is progressing. But I also like Holland because I like some of the players. It's okay. I think rather than, the tribalism is historic, but if you think about, okay, like Liverpool's lineup on any given day right now is, a Brazilian, 2 Argentinians, 2 Francophone, 3 Dutch Caribbean players, an Egyptian, a German, etc. There's one Englishman who sometimes comes on, when we need to shore things up. So what is this? Like I'm reminded of when we talked earlier about Celtic and Rangers and the sectarian dimension, and most of the players, used to be they would only sign players of a certain confession, but the Celtic players today have no connection with the Irish working class in Glasgow, and for a while the fans try to compensate, and it's always stuck in my memory that they had a brilliantly misguided song for Shinsuke Nakamura, the great Japanese midfielder who joins them in the early zeros, and they sing, "He eats chow mein, he loves Sinn Féin." Okay, they're trying really hard here, right. Stretching things a little beyond credulity. But I think what we're actually seeing, and this is almost like FIFA, interestingly, is way in advance of most of the nation states it combines today in terms of its concept of nationhood, its reflection of a world of migration. That basically you can choose to play in national football for the team in which the country in which you live, the country in which you were born, which might be different, the country in which your parents or grandparents were born, etc. So you have many, many players who have multiple options. I mean, the Adnan Januzaj many, many years ago literally had 7 options, I think, because of the breakup of Yugoslavia.
Chose the worst, Belgium.
well, yes, but I'm saying basically FIFA's way ahead of the nation states in terms of having this idea that who can be German, who can be French.
Right, so let me take that and sort of take your Algeria point earlier on, because it ties beautifully to this. David, there's a famous Benzema quote, especially given the context of the rise of the far right in France when the Le Pens were mouthing off. He said, when I score, so he's of Algerian descent, played for France. He said, when I score, I'm French. When I don't, I'm Algerian. Unpack that for me.
Well, so too Mesut Ozil said the same thing about his German roots and his Turkish roots. Romelu Lukaku has said exactly the same in the same words about his African roots and his Belgian roots. It seems to me that it is one of the great virtues of modern football is the possibility of inventing and putting in public these incredibly complex migratory histories. It seems to me, particularly in the example of England, because we could look at this story, we could look at the experience of Benzema and Ozil, and it's like racism, 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 exclusion. And of course, that is widespread across football. On the other hand, I know of very few other spaces in European politics, certainly, where the possibility of such unabashed levels of integration becomes possible. Look at the England national team these days. Impossible to imagine an England national team that is just white. It is inconceivable, even, over the last 30 years, that you could equate Englishness with whiteness has been rendered completely nonsensical by the experience and performance of the England men's national team. And I think that's a really amazing and extraordinary phenomena. And again, while of course many players of colour experience racism both on and off the pitch in this context, we also have precisely the opposite. I mean, if I can give the example of the England men's national team before the Euros in 2021. It was Euro 2020, but delayed for a year because of COVID. And the England team were taking the knee. And probably about 10-15% of the crowd start booing them. And very clearly with a aggressive right-wing nativist agenda. And that seems to me, yeah, that's England. 15 to 20% of the country, that's exactly who they are. What is so extraordinary is that eventually, when roused, the vast majority of the rest of the crowd start clapping to push the booers out and to celebrate and support the players in what they are doing. And again, that is pretty much, I would say, where England is. There is now a quiet anti-racist majority that does not buy the aggressive, loud nativism that we're seeing. Similarly, in the final of the Euros, you'll probably remember 3 players of colour for the England team tragically missed their penalties, and everybody knows that they're going to experience really unpleasant racism on social media, and they duly do. What is so amazing is that at the same time, Marcus Rashford's mural in Manchester receives more than 20,000 people who put post-it notes of love up. And I should say, probably for the first time in the history of English football, the vast majority of white players on that England team actively coming out in support of their black colleagues. So football can be a space in which racism and exclusion and nativism can and is expressed.
Which one's winning?
Where and when? Right now in England, anti-racism is winning, I would say.
Can I add something to this, actually, talking about the Premier League and the UK national team? Actually, let's take the example of Mohamed Salah, Liverpool. I mean, how much...
Look at him smiling like a proud dad.
I mean, you know, like the Islamophobia and how the stereotypes and the mindsets about different cultures, different people, different religion. But when Mohamed Salah started to play in Liverpool, there are a study from Stanford University that 18.8% dropped of Islamophobia and crime dropped down because of the representation of Mohamed Salah as a hero and as a great football player that many people in Liverpool and beyond looked up to him to change the whole mindset and the whole idea about Islam, about Egyptian, about the culture, about Arab in general. And that is really powerful example on what David was saying about a world hopefully less racist, less discriminating, less through the football icons that the football bring to us. And, you know, like we celebrate.
But let me come in here and try and play spoiler a little bit. Is it only happening because Salah is outstanding? Would it not happen if he was an average player?
Absolutely, because he's outstanding. That adds a value.
I mean, because we heard from David when the black players missed the penalties in the Euros, there was this quick pivot from a lot of the fan base to racially abuse Marcus Rashford. Did Sterling miss a penalty as well? Saka, Rashford,
and Sancho.
Yeah. Sancho. So again, is it only going to work when the player is outstanding and doing well? That it aligns?
Definitely helps.
Right.
That's why the pressure is really high to always be the top on everything, like work harder, play harder. You have to prove yourself 300 times more if you are from another region or another religion or another context. This is the dilemma that we face in the world, because there's still a lot of prejudice going on about where you come from, what's your identity, what's your religion. And there are many people who try to put you into boxes, even without trying to know how capable you are, how great you are, how talented you are. And that is still deeply rooted in societies, unfortunately. And if football helps, then that is the way, because I have seen a lot of examples that football helped, and that Mohamed Salah has a great example in the Liverpool context, that how he shifted the mindsets completely. But not only him, of course, there are many other examples of that. When talking about Morocco playing in the World Cup for the first time ever in history, when talking about different nationalities that managed to make it, and how it changed the whole concept. When you said that you want to support another team from another backgrounds, another religion, that adds value to the collective universal language that we are talking about.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the alter ego, because I can see, as you say, the Liverpool fans sing, if he scores another few, I'll be Muslim too.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
There's like literally this kind of, and I think the English Premier League has been, I don't know what anybody else would say, but has been quite advanced in terms of accommodating Muslim players. For example, during the fast, actually letting players fast and letting them break their fast during the game, etc. So, but then you compare it to France, where Islamophobia is so much part of the French establishment's self-identity that, they've never really decolonized themselves. So you have these spectacles, like, we've discussed, okay, the Zidane Président moment, 98, okay, Black, Blanc, Bleu, there's this idea that basically Le Pen has been, this is not a real French team. Then they win the World Cup. Then it's like Black, Blanc, Bleu, Zidane, Président. Like, great, this is all, bridging all these divides. And then, but of course, society's power relations actually reaffirm those divides. And you have the Banlieue Rebellion in 2006. And then suddenly, when the national team is not doing very well, and you have the players strike against that coach, Dominic, then they have Laurent Blanc saying, seriously, the man is called Laurent Blanc, white, right? Saying there are not enough players of our history and our culture in the squad. Like, dude. But, this very contested thing comes 2014 and, Marine Le Pen is now jumping. I'm not sure about the credentials of this French team because they look like they're not going to qualify. They beat Ukraine in a qualifier. Mamadou Sakho grabs the microphone and belts out Les Marseillaise, which, of course, not all the French players actually sing, particularly those from African Muslim backgrounds. There's a real contest going on. But, the spectacle 2018, they win. This is a team that basically starts with 8 of the 11 players are not white. They're mostly Muslims from Africa. And so you have the spectacle of N'Golo Kante and the rest of the team going to the Elysee Palace to honor the glory of France with Macron. And she's wearing hijab. Sorry, his mother is wearing hijab, which she couldn't wear on a school outing if she was escorting her children, because that's France. FIFA allows women to play football in hijab. France does not. That's its own choice. So I think, the picture is mixed depending on where you are. I would also, there's something to throw in about ISIS having quite a similar perspective.
I thought you were going to say a national team or something.
No, quite a similar perspective to the French right, as in Muslims don't belong in France. So the Bataclan attack in 2016 begins at the Stade de France during a France-Germany match, in which basically
December 2015. Oh no, sorry, go on.
Yeah. Actually, you're right. It was 2015, late 2015.
End of 2015. Yeah.
And basically, there are 4 Muslim players on the field on each side, and for ISIS, this represents something intolerable, because actually, this is eliminate the gray zone, as they call it. We should not, pretend that Muslims have a place in European society. So it's a violent negation through a mass attack. They didn't get into the stadium. They did kill Lassana Diarra, was one of the Muslim players for France. One of his cousins actually died in that attack. But you can see, France almost is the center of this very turbulent contest over who and what is France as represented on the football field.
Can I just add, a lot of this conversation rightly is about how the public, how fans, what happens in the stadium, how they respond to players, the kind of racial slurs that you get on social media or you hear in a stadium. That's important, of course. But what it doesn't allow us to think about is the institutionalized racism of football and all the institutions more widely.
How is football institutionally racist?
32% of players in the Premier League are black. Okay. By the time you get to the number who are doing their UEFA badges, we're down to about 16, 17%. By the time you get to those who are actually in the market trying to get a job as a coach, we're below 10%. There are no chief scouts who are black in the Premier League. In the top two divisions of English football, there is one director of football who is black. Bless him, Les Ferdinand at QPR. And when you actually get to coaches and backroom staff in professional football in the top four leagues, the number of black faces fluctuates between 0% and 4%. And, you know, the only labour pool that provides coaches is ex-players. And we've gone from over 30% down to almost 0%. And this is not because black players don't want to be coaches. It's not because they don't want to give it a go. They're all relentlessly giving it a go. I mean, you know, just as one example, how many chances does Frank Lampard get to be a coach? How bad has he got to be before people decide, actually, maybe this is not a good idea? Whereas Sol Campbell, you know, captain of Arsenal, captain of Tottenham, captain of England, a player every bit as good as Frank Lampard, literally could not get his foot in the door. And if that is not institutionalized racism, I don't know what is.
Can I add something to race with you, Honey? Gender. Where are we at right now?
It's challenging, but there is kind of a movement that it's trying to bridge the gap, but it's definitely challenging. If you talk about men's football and women's football, there is a huge gap. Let's start with history. The FIFA World Cup started in 1913 in Uruguay, and women's football started the World Cup in 1991. So there's more than 60 plus years between those two World Cups. And of course, if we look about the investment between men's football and women's football, there is a huge gap. But now it's shifting. Why? Because women's football has proven that it is not just a charity, or it's not a charity. It's a product, it's a brand, it's talent that can give the world another perspective, and there should be more investment in that. Therefore, the last Women's World Cup, for example, in 2023 in New Zealand and Australia, showed us a huge shift in terms of broadcasters and sponsors, viewers. We had more than 2 billion viewers for women's football in New Zealand and Australia. So now the hope is 27, the Women's World Cup will be in Brazil, that for the first time ever, this will generate revenue, because most of the revenues or all the revenues that are generated are only from the Men's World Cup. Until 23, the Women's World Cup has always been a loss. But 23 was the first time the FIFA Women's World Cup generated millions of revenues, that now the pressure is so high to build up on it. But of course, if you talk about countries, if you talk about member associations, if you talk about opportunities for girls to access to stadiums, to access to grassroots programs, to access to being referees, being coaches, being leaders in clubs and leagues, there is a huge struggle. And therefore, we need to call for bridging the gap. We need to empower those girls and women to one day dream that they can be an owner of a club, that they can be a boss in a league, that they can be a coach, that they can be a referee. It is changing, but it's still slow. But that's why we need the government bodies, we need governments, we need politicians, we need leaders to drive the change. Because until today, the system is designed by men for men. It's a fact. Like the men had to decide when to give the woman the opportunity for a job, or the opportunity to get into a club, or opportunity to get into a national team. And until that change, and we see women making decisions on behalf of women, there is still a long way to go.
I mean, a really good example of basically men creating a male space seems to me Kit. It's only in the last 3 or 4 years that we've actually got football boots that are designed for the shape of women's feet. They're not just smaller version of men's feet, right? And none of the boot manufacturers have clocked that. It's just, pink it and shrink it, basically. Put out some sort of tatty feminine version of what is essentially a male piece of kit. The same goes for the structure and shape of jerseys until very recently. And then we have the whole issue of periods. And, my God, women menstruate. So that's an issue about white shorts. And it shouldn't have to be an issue. For women to preserve their dignity and continue, how hard can it be just to change the colour of your shorts or to think about alternative, sanitary arrangements? That's like a whole zone, and Adidas and Nike and all of those dudes have not been thinking about it. I mean, the same is true of socks. For a very long time, the socks are based on male ratios. So, you have a sock that is big enough for your foot as a woman, it's not the right shape for the rest of your leg. Or you get one that works for your leg, suddenly your boots are drowning in male sock. So at an absolutely profound level, the game has, masculine normality at its core. And that will be one of the greatest transformations that women's football, brings, is not merely, of course, it's just unbelievably important that, girls and women have the opportunity to play football and enjoy it in all its richness, but we're also challenging entrenched forms of masculinity and sexism. And that is an extraordinary prize. I mean, I would say if anyone cares about the history of football 100 years from now, if we're still here having that conversation, they will look back at this moment and say the rise of women's football and the challenge to the patriarchy within world football, this is the most important, the most exciting thing that is going on in football. And let me just say on that, the tragedy of the 2023 Women's World Cup, a fantastic tournament full of so many talented women. And what are we all talking about? A nasty piece of work, another toxic masculine, display of behaviour from Rubiales and all of the nonsense going on inside the Spanish Football Federation. So that's my number one hope for 2027 is like, we're not going to do a repeat of that.
It's ruined the moment, indeed.
We're going to celebrate all the amazing women who are playing and transforming the game.
Yeah. You want to add something?
I actually wanted to ask if anybody's got any thoughts about this. But I mean, I'll be like, women's football, like as a thing that I'm going to bunk work, right, and turn on a game. I've been doing that for men's football, obviously, for a very long time. Women's football, yes, it's like maybe the Euro before 2023, the 2023 World Cup. I will make an excuse. Sorry, I have an important meeting to watch Spain, right? Because what I see in Spain is a form of football that I learned to love in the heyday of the Barcelona men's team under Pep at the beginning. Like Aitana Bonmati for me is like an absolutely extraordinary footballer, like the best footballer in the world right now. And I'm thinking, okay, Barca obviously has an academy. Yeah. And they're teaching, there's a there's a DNA of that football. And then Real has a few players. Most of the Spain squad seems to come from a couple of clubs. Then I'm sort of looking like transfer fees in the market are starting to rise. Like the injection of money, there's the sense of, okay, as you say, you could make, if there's more money to be made off the Women's World Cup, that will be because of television revenues principally. And so there's this higher level of interest. And there's this almost, I wouldn't say it's following the same trajectory, but, most men's clubs, well, I don't know about most, a lot of men's clubs in the Premier League and the European Champions League now have a women's club. So it's almost modeling, it's fitting the same
But
grid.
that division is still quite obscene when we look at the numbers, right? So, I mean, there's massive amounts of money in the men's game. And
no, but what I was going
to...
if we talk about the transfer only, like until 23, it was 9 billion. Yeah. But for the women's football, it was not even, it increased, but 20%.
Right. So my question is it an economics question? And can that be cracked?
And my question is, actually, is that something you want to happen, that actually it follows the trajectory of commercialized men's football? in the same way? Or what impact does that have on women's football, as a pursuit on the ground?
Okay.
Is that the goal?
So
That's the question.
is that the goal, Hani?
The goal is to equalize the game,
Right.
no matter what. I mean, of course, when we talk about talent, there would be arguments. Men are built differently and women are differently. For me, the rules are the same. Like 90 minutes, the rules of the games, everyone on the pitch, the talent is there, they score, they win, regardless. It's men and women. I think it's just we have to change the mindset about women's football and how it has massively changed across the years and how much we need to invest in it and take it as a brand rather than just a charity or a favor to support girls playing football. For example, when we talk about men's team, for example, Barcelona had a women's football team way longer than Real Madrid, for example. So Real Madrid had to cope up with the shift and the rise of women's football. They said, we cannot not have a women's national team. So now Real Madrid has a women's football team. And also the same applies on sponsors and broadcasting. So the FIFA leadership said, if you don't want to broadcast a women's team, you don't broadcast men's team. And that's when the shift happens. If you want to sponsor the men's World Cup, you must sponsor the Women's World Cup. That's why now we have Lenovo for Men's World Cup, we have for Women's World Cup, we have other brands supporting both at all level. And there where the shift will come, when everyone realizes that we need to equalize the game.
Okay, so let me take money, which is a big concept here, and it can be sliced and diced in many ways. I don't want to just have this smushy, wishy-washy conversation about money, and we can slice it up and we can go, okay, well, you can look at the FIFAs and the UEFAs and so on, and international football and the confederations, and we can look at clubs and that commercial aspect. What is the biggest challenge, David, right now when it comes to money in football, and is it a healthy thing?
The Premier League has been in existence for nearly 32 years. In that 32 years, it has collectively only made a profit in 4 years.
What?
The Premier League loses hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds every single year. Of course, the people who sell, Bentleys and, outrageous expensive SUVs to football players in Cheshire, they're making money. Okay, football clubs lose money. The Premier League as a whole is £11.8 billion in debt. And a very small amount of that is like Syria, the sort of debt, like Tottenham borrows money from the bank to build a stadium, standard form. The majority of it is basically handouts from various owners over the years that they never expect the money to come back, or it is buying players on the never, because now when a player is bought, you play a quarter up front and the rest is constantly being projected into the future. This is the great illusion about football, is that somehow this is a space for making profits.
So what, is it for soft power, ultimately?
Well, it's a whole different thing. So certainly for the UAE, its ownership of Manchester City is clearly part of a wider soft power state program. For some, it is a rich man's toy and plaything. I mean, I think to a great extent, the global super rich and the oligarchs are so spiritually barren, so emotionally empty, so incapable of generating actual real meaning and purpose from their wealth and their status and their power. They are so struck down by ennui that they buy football clubs as a form of ersatz community over which they can spread their noblesse oblige. I do think that's what's going on. Why else would you do it? If you're serious about making money, don't buy a football club. Buy shares in Meta. Abramovich dropped nearly $2 billion in his time at Chelsea. He never made a penny. He never had any intention. So I think that's the first thing to recognize, is all the talk about it's a big business and commercialism. This is the most insane and unconventional economic space you can possibly imagine. The idea that it is a model for any other form of economic activity is completely insane.
So let me try and rephrase it in my simple terms. to take it from the academic and maybe formulate a question for Tony then, is that where we were under the illusion as to think that football was all about the modern game is a result of an attempt to commercialize the game because it was profitable in order to make loads and loads of money. But that's not entirely true. It's a plaything for oligarchs and nation states and so on, because of all those wonderful things that we were talking about earlier on, the civic religion and this vehicle for all these amazing things that express our humanity. Do you agree with that, Tony?
I think it's complicated. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all explanation. I absolutely agree. Like an Abramovich or a UAE ownership are looking for bragging rights, are looking for some sense of, there's more money, they have more money than they need. And so, and this is financialized capitalism at this particular point, actually is producing so much excess that's looking for investments in junk, in art, like, the prices of art just goes up 300% every auction.
And bad art.
Or sometimes actually cool art, but sort of
that too.
Cool art becomes art that's now owned by oligarchs. So it's kind of like, but I mean, I'm saying, this is generating so much finance that's looking for places to go for profit. So it's looking for profit. It may not actually generate. There's a weird thing, by the way, in terms of the stability of an investment. A football club can get relegated. Right? This is, it can drop down. It can be no longer in the Champions League, no longer in the Premier League. That's a huge risk if you're, a proper investor. That might be also why there's this move for like Super League, like trying to create an American-style franchise, as in, the idea that the big clubs will be stable. They'll be in the top tier no matter what. Your investment will be safe. So I think, there's that. On the one hand, but you can see a lot of, let's not find a word for them, but you look at Manchester United's ownership, they're definitely making money because they bought the club on a credit card. I mean, they basically, you come in, you borrow a whole lot of money to buy a very famous, like legendary club, no, absolutely much respect. It's a proper club, it has a history. And you basically go into debt to buy it, and then you impose a debt on the club, and the club pays for it, and you just take sort of, and now and again, every now and again, you take a...
Not just every now and again.
Yeah.
And the Glazers we should note, are an exception.
Right.
But they've taken more than £500 million out of Manchester United.
Right, but there's another sort of capitalist incentive to buying a club, which is the same reason you buy stocks. You don't buy stocks because of the revenue they're going to generate, but the profits the company is going to make. You buy them as a speculative investment, as in I'm buying something now for £400 million on the assumption that someone will buy it from me for £1.5 billion in a few years' time. I mean, I think that's Liverpool's ownership. I mean, they're a hedge fund. That's why they make moves like this. So they're not looking for the club to be profitable, but they're looking for their asset to actually grow in value. So I think there are a number of different arcs here. I think in general, though, what we're talking about is capitalism. This is the context in which the game happens. So you can't separate.
Has it taken something away from the game?
Well, I don't know. I think it's hard to say. It's not
or has
the same.
It changed it into something else?
Well, it's not the same game as it was, 30 or 40 years ago. That's like capitalism, for better or for worse or for both. I think you can't avoid capitalism. That's just the reality of the question. And capitalism can be incredibly destructive, but it can also actually be a driver of a lot of progress. Question is how it's regulated. That's really, where we land, because you can't imagine an ideal world in which money is not going to make a difference. But if there are limits set on the damage it can do, and it can be channeled into positive outcomes.
Is it regulated well?
No, not well enough. No.
Barely would be my description when it comes to regulation. Yeah. I mean, I think the point Tony's making is true, is that obviously this influx of money has transformed, certainly in the case of England, the quality of the stadiums, the extraordinary concentration of talent. I mean, pitches these days, which even 20 years ago were kind of muddy baths by the time you got to January, are now snooker tables all year, and that affects the kind of football and the aesthetics of it. But to just focus on the Premier League seems to me to miss some of the most important things about what global capitalism does in general and in football in particular, is that the concentration of power and resources at the top is borne at the price of incredible and increasing levels of inequality for everybody below, not just within, say, English football and the top division compared to the lower divisions, but let's take the case of Africa. So Tony earlier said 300 million people watching the Premier League every weekend. It's probably, I reckon it's probably 500 million. That data's from the Premier League, like in 2009. And Africa, if you go back to the 1990s, had a fabulous domestic football scene. You know, crowds were huge, 80, 90,000 for derby games. It had a very rich local press that reported on the local game. It had the most fabulous crowd culture of music, of dance, you know, of an aesthetic quality that really nowhere else in the world
Any particular
could match.
matches or derbies?
Well, you know, Ghana's, you know, the Ghanaian derby between Hearts of Oak and Asante Kotoko. You know, people were queuing up 3 days beforehand outside the stadium to secure their place.
Anymore?
No, they barely get anyone coming to the game these days. I mean, African domestic football has absolutely collapsed. You know, most places, you know, before you draw up the schedule, you're going, right, when's Arsenal playing? Because we can't have a game when Arsenal playing because nobody will come. And there is no, I mean, it's even worse in the sense that you might at least hope that with all of these African players coming to the rich leagues, at least there would be some trickle of money back into African football. But as the overwhelming majority of African footballers who make it outside of the continent are trained in private academies, they're not in teams within the kind of conventional pyramid structure. That money all disappears back into those academies and into Swiss bank accounts, and none of it is going back into African football. So the Premier League's success, and this is not a criticism of everyone in Africa who's saying like, I'm watching Chelsea, Manchester United this weekend, because obviously the product on offer is in so many ways so superior, but it has come at a really, really significant cost. And that is the, you know, virtual destruction of what was once an absolutely great, vibrant and distinctively African football culture.
Hani, on the individual level, still trying to sort of look at the impact of money. And I think of a hypothetical kid in Bethlehem with a lot of talent. Maybe this kid doesn't have to be at the level of Mo Salah or a Messi or Ronaldo. Maybe this kid just has enough talent to be an average Premier League player or La Liga player or Serie A player. That level of that transformational aspect to that person's life. I don't know. The average salary would be what, $50,000, $60,000 a week. Talk to me a bit about that hope and that dream and that yearning to make it in the big leagues, especially for kids from places like Palestine.
This is really important, actually. I just wanted to add, money creates power. Like, it's like you cannot separate money from power. A lot of billionaires, they would like to own clubs because part of it, or a huge part of it, is power, right? And if power is used correctly, then the benefit can be massive in terms of investments, in terms of how you bring back money to the game. And I'm talking here about the legacy that the football can leave, the social impact that, yes, you generate money, but how much you invested back into football, how much opportunities you give, how much football pitches you build, how much infrastructure you facilitate in those countries that is mostly needed. If we talk about Africa, if we talk about the Middle East, if we talk about the global South in any way, money is definitely much needed because it can open so many doors. If we talk about the little girl or little boy in the streets of Bethlehem, of having a dream one day to play for the national team, let's say, like not just only to play internationally for other football clubs, to play for the national team and represent their country on a high level, it's still a dream for many Palestinian children. It's a dream that they don't even dare to dream it. The fact that you cannot dare to dream because of all the context surrounding you, whether it's poverty, whether I'm not talking just about Palestine, whether it's poverty, whether it's extremism, whether it's war, whether it's a harsh context you grew up in, a lot of children don't even have the ability to dream because they know it might never happen. How? It's impossible. And the fact that this hope and this persistence and the ability to dream that one day you would like to play for Liverpool, you would like to play for Barcelona, for Real Madrid, it still exists and gives them another perspective that there is still hope and there is a future for the talent that they have. And that's the example of many other kids all around the world. That's why money is important to invest, giving them the opportunity, scouting, looking for talent all over the world. The example of the Palestinian kids is definitely very important to relate to because every child needs support, needs access, needs an opportunity. And that's what I say in the Arab world or in the context where I come from. Opportunities are endless. There are so many great talents, but how to discover this talent, how much you can give the platform for those children, for those youngsters, that's where money comes in to create academies, grassroots programs, development programs. And that I must say that governing bodies are doing well because they have 211 member associations. Whether you talk about Asia Confederation, whether you talk Africa Confederation, whether you talk about UEFA, they support this revenues that they generate back into football to ensure that those opportunities are given. And football is alive and football is rising at all levels. And the idea is from grassroots level, then to elite level. So you cannot just go to the national teams without going back to the roots and to the grassroots level to ensure that every child will have the chance going through all the steps.
Tony, Hani mentioned power. Money can't work without power. Power is inextricably intertwined with geopolitics. Football is not immune when it comes to geopolitics. I'm a little younger than you are, but we both grew up in South Africa. No normal sport in an abnormal society. South Africa was isolated. Football, cricket, you name it, during the height of the apartheid years. Where are we now when it comes to football and the countries and regimes and situations that football takes a stand on and doesn't take a stand on? I left it very open-ended for you.
God, why are you asking me this?
Yeah, I feel very clear in my mind as to what you're referring to.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think, as you say, South Africa, our experience was the sports boycott was incredibly valuable, right? Because South Africa was a white settler colonial regime that imagined itself to be part of the West. It imagined itself to be the rampart, defending the West, Western civilization from. At that time, it was communism. Was the idea that that's who we are. So of course we're part of the West. This is when you send your troops into the township to shoot black children, you're actually defending the West from communism. Right? That's the kind of construction. So when the regime's base starts seeing, wait a minute, we can't play cricket anymore. They didn't care about football. They said football was a black game, quite literally. I know from experiences at school of hearing that. The Olympics, that kind of hurt them. But the really profound impact came in rugby. That was the game in which they had absolutely wrapped and invested their identity. And, the International Rugby Board by the early 80s still is very white. It's very colonial. It's a bunch of sort of countries that are pretty sympathetic in a way to the apartheid sort of settler regime. And 1981, they're suddenly expelled. Why? Because an absolutely excellent organization in New Zealand called Halt All Racist Tours disrupts a Springbok rugby tour, like literally goes to the matches and makes it impossible to play rugby with apartheid South Africa without there being a riot, right, at every game. And, the New Zealand rugby authorities are not anti-apartheid solidarity minded. They're just like, hey, we can't really deal with this. And the International Rugby Board kicks them out. That has a profound psychological impact on the support base of this regime. Okay, why are we talking about this? Because as we know, everybody can see there's a basic hypocrisy in the international football system right now. Russia invades Ukraine. Within 4 days, Russia is basically suspended from all international competition, right? And it's like we can't have this country that's violating international law playing international football. Palestine has been under occupation that actually violates FIFA statutes for decades. When the genocide in Palestine starts, FIFA simply is turning away. UEFA is turning away. Nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to act. And football civil society can see this and they can feel this. And there's a sense of, we'll talk to our lawyers. We're not sure if we can do this. Literally, they said that. I think last year there was an effort to bring this case at UEFA, and UEFA said, we need to talk to our lawyers. Somehow that step wasn't taken with Ukraine and Russia, I don't think, or was done very quickly, if so. So basically, there's this massive movement now, this wave generating in football civil society, where UEFA has banned the display of Palestinian flags and statements and banners at stadiums. Fans are starting to defy that. You're starting to have coaches associations, former players of great stature, stepping up and saying, this is intolerable. As you say, from South Africa, there can be no normal sport with genocide. If you play with a genocidal regime, you are normalizing that genocide, and that's intolerable. So I think that is going to force the hand. I'm hoping that's going to force the hand of the federations, because the federations, left to their own choices thus far, have been like, we don't really want to talk about this politics. Politics is dirty. We can't touch this, etc. But the experience of what we saw in rugby in 1981 is that when the grassroots makes it impossible to normalize this kind of regime and settler colonial apartheid regime, it becomes, they're forced to make a choice for pragmatic reasons to actually push Israel aside, because the fans, the civil society of the game will not tolerate it. So I think, yes, there's a hypocrisy. That hypocrisy's been evident so widely for so long, and there's a real mounting movement to go, this is intolerable. What the values of this game and these institutions are supposed to represent is so systematically violated by what Israel is doing that it's going to become untenable to have Israel on the pitch.
Nobody needs my permission to chime in here. So, David, honey, have at it.
I believe governments have a huge responsibility or obligation to adhere to their rules, to the international law, definitely. And this is a reflection for government bodies as well, to follow their own regulations and rules, regardless, and no matter what. And in the case for Russia, for example, it's a reflection also to countries and member association. 9 countries refused to play Russia. And there was a pressure then on the governing bodies to ban Russia from football. The question here is, we haven't seen this for Palestine and Israel. And we struggled through why those countries, they didn't have the same reaction with Russia that could pressure governing bodies, organizations to act the same.
Honey, you've been in the corridors of power. Have you had conversations with
a lot, all
people
the time.
in power on this issue? What do they say to you?
All the time. This answer, for example, Russia was like a member associations, countries, they refused to play with Russia. We haven't received objections, and countries say, we don't want to play. Now, it's increasing. Spain said they don't want to play. Italy struggled a lot to play with Israel for the qualifier. We have seen Norway already announced that a match with Israel would have an outcome. All the outcome will be support for Gaza and the children of Gaza and Doctors Without Borders. 2 years of a genocide almost. We haven't heard those voices before. And the question is why? Why the rules, and why some countries they are banned and they are punished, and others are tolerated. I would like to know what is the thing that we can decide on some things and other things we cannot. And this is really important discussion, because the fans and the solidarity for the Palestinian people all around the world showed that the power is with the people. And that gives a lot of hope in the context where we are losing hope, in a situation where it is really difficult. It's a genocide that's going on. Stadiums are smashed, infrastructure are destroyed, hospitals, children, men and women. A genocide unfolding in front of all our eyes. And barely you see a stand from politics, international communities. The question remains, how do we handle this? What is the next step? And if this pressure from the fans will make the shift, I see it's coming, and I believe it's coming, because the power of the people and the power of the fans should never be estimated. Now we have seen the Palestinian flags in all the stadiums. No one can ban it anymore, I believe. It's everywhere. In every single match I see, we could see it more, but a lot of football clubs took a stand and raised the Palestinian flags, not just to stand with politics. I don't talk about politics here, to talk about solidarity and humanity. That's our topic. We don't want to talk about politics. It's not a football match who you are with or without. It's about a humanity and solidarity and the resilience of those people who are fighting for justice and equality at all levels. How we gonna support them? How can we feel with them? How can we give them the platform to one day dream that they will be independent? One day they will have the same equal rights in football and beyond, because that's where it comes. Football is a reflection of a society. For me, 90 minutes on the pitch, it's a reflection of a whole of a society. If you stand for justice and equality and the freedom and the rights for Palestinian people, you stand for justice and equality at all levels. You don't select your causes. I think it's sad that racism and stereotypes and discrimination is heavily seen in that context, because for many people or countries, Palestinians do not matter. We are just numbers. We are not white. We don't come from another background. For many, it's Palestine, it's about Islam, it's about jihadists, it's about... And those sort of stereotypes are embedded in some mindsets in the world. And that kind of gives the eligibility to huge powers to say it's okay what's going on. The entitlement that it's fine. Like, not only Israel is bombing Palestine, 9 countries at the same time, and the world is watching. The world is literally watching. And that shows that there is so much injustice in the world, and the Palestinian cause just prevailed it. I'm talking about the general hypocrisy and double standard of the world. And the Palestine cause actually prevailed it massively. It showed to the world that this Western democracy that they taught us since we were kids, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expressions, failed massively in the face of the genocide. Because you have seen so many people are afraid to speak, are afraid to raise their voice. Whenever this topic comes, it's sensitive, it's political, when in fact, it's about humanity. It's about stopping the genocide, stopping the war, give the basic rights to the Palestinian people to live in freedom and justice, whether it's in the football arena or at all levels, because this is a struggle for more than 77 years. It didn't happen just recently. And therefore, I am happy to see the fans and footballers and clubs are raising up their voice. And this gives me personally hope. And for people who fight for justice and humanity, let's put it that way, humanity, it gives hope to all of those, because then we see that the world's still okay. There are people who are standing for right no matter what.
David?
That was very powerful. Thank you. It's really good to hear it. I think we just need to go back a little. Even before Gaza happened, Israel should have been kicked out of football a decade ago. It should have been kicked out of every sporting institution. It was completely clear when the Palestinian Football Association and its allies took the case to FIFA for the first time, I believe in 2015, arguing that Israel systematically broke FIFA's statutes. They allowed teams to play in their league who are on occupied land in the West Bank, as defined by the UN. They have a systematic problem with racism inside their stadiums, which I can testify to, having been to quite a lot of football in Israel and heard an unbelievable level of anti-Palestinian racism and expressions of violence. They have systematically undermined Palestinian football by refusing players the opportunity to enter and leave freely from the West Bank and Gaza to participate in international tournaments. All of these things are explicitly against FIFA's statutes. This was agreed by Willy Lemke, who was the German social democrat who was working as the special rapporteur on sport for the UN, who ruled on this matter in 2017. It is entirely legally unambiguous. If any other state, if any other football association was guilty of anything close to this, they would have been out of FIFA faster than you can imagine. Not only that, but we know that the Israeli state and the Israeli diplomatic service has systematically intervened in that conversation at FIFA, mobilizing its diplomatic service to put pressure by one remove on football associations and federations to ensure that this vote is either delayed or not successful. Once again, if any other country were to do this, were to mobilize its diplomatic service in pursuit of issues at FIFA under the autonomy of sport element of FIFA statutes, they would have been slung out immediately and not allowed back into international football until FIFA had reorganized their football association, which they have done for many African states and many Asian states. So even before we get to Gaza, the case is absolutely rock solid. Israel should have been removed from international football, and I would say there's probably a pretty good case to remove it from every other single sporting federation. Why has this not happened? I mean, as Hani has argued, there is within the unreflective elites who operate inside sport an uncritical acceptance of that mainstream position. Israel right, Palestine wrong, with undertones of Islamophobia and racism. I also think there is the most terrible, terrible cowardice and the most terrible, terrible moral vacuum at the heart of many football administrators.
I'm just reminded of a historical moment, and in some ways, the word that we've missed all along is colonialism, because I think not only, in terms of Israel's history and its connection with Europe, this is a project that actually comes into being historically because of the European colonial takeover of the old Ottoman Empire. That's where Israel originates. Putting all that, we don't have to get into all of that now, but I think in some ways the most important moment of, because we're not unpacking, why is Israel in UEFA, right? The countries all around us are in the Asian Federation, or in the case of Egypt, in Africa. And so why is Egypt in UEFA? When did Israel become part of UEFA? Answer to that, 1994. Right? It was basically, if that hadn't happened, this is one of the most important, in some ways, moments that we haven't really thought about. If Israel hadn't been transferred from the Asian Federation to UEFA, they would probably be out of international football long ago because of the balance of power in the Asian Federation.
Well, and the fact that, many Asian countries were refusing to play against them.
Even then.
Indonesia refused persistently to play against them. Iran,
Exactly.
and then, they were banished, of course, to Oceania to qualify or not for the World Cup for many years. But there was real resistance amongst governments and football associations in Asia on all the usual grounds.
Right. So in some ways, there's this idea, and in some ways, I think the sympathy, the racism that you were talking about, as in seeing Palestinians differently and seeing Israel's violence against Palestinians differently, is a colonial tradition. It's like, here is the West, colonies kind of, they have to subordinate the native resistance. That's just part of the colonial history. So somewhere in there, there's like, violence is just part of the game here. And, they prefer not to think about it. Like they don't treat the colonized as human in the same way.
Right.
South Africa knew the same thing.
Okay. I want to take a breath and take us sort of into extra time. I guess it's sort of 3-3, and it's been a thrilling game, and now we're into extra time, and legs are tiring. Maybe let me offer up a perspective of my own as to how pessimistic I am about the future of football. And then I'm going to ask all of you for your thoughts. Maybe let's fast forward 20 years. Maybe this is just a consequence of me growing up sort of in the 80s and 90s and Manchester United winning all the time in the 90s, that I'm nostalgic for things seeming amazing back then. But right now, maybe I'm just a guy in his 40s who's a curmudgeon because I watch VAR and it drives me insane. The video assistant referee, every time, no team can celebrate a goal. David, you speak about the ritual. You can't even have the ritual anymore because the entire stadium erupts, but then they're told, wait, hang on, we're checking the lines. Oh, sorry, offside or a shirt tug or something. No goal, or whatever it might be.
What's left to English referees, which are just terrible.
So that's one example for me, tied into the commercialization, tied into the money, tied into a kind of mechanization of it all right now. We think of AI, as you mentioned, honey. Now I watch it and I think I don't enjoy this. It feels weird. People say, the game's gone, right? Maybe I'm just getting old, right? And so I think 20 years down the line, there's probably going to be more and more of this. And I'm going to be that guy in his 60s going, I don't recognize this game because it's like an episode of Black Mirror and not that theater and spectacle and ritual that I learned to love throughout my life. Where do you guys stand on this? What will the game look like in about 20 years, Tony?
I could talk about VAR for a second, and I want to invoke a quote from my friend Thaljieh Cole, the writer, who when it first came along said, this is terrible because if you don't have the "we was robbed," if there's a perfect, if the ref doesn't make a mistake, you don't have anyone to blame when you fail. Okay, but putting that aside, I think the problem with VAR is that there's still English referees in the Premier League looking at the VAR, getting 35% of their calls wrong because they're just not very good referees. Sorry, David.
Not a representative of the of PGMOL.
I would just say this: the game has evolved through so many iterations, and it is in many ways unrecognizable just as a physical spectacle. In a way that's better, frankly. And I think football is the same for the reasons David articulated at the very beginning, the magic of what the spectacle represents. I don't think that's going to go away. I think they're going to mess it up. I think this extraterritoriality, this thing where suddenly they want to play a La Liga game in Miami. I'm like, no, the crowd are so much part of the chemistry of the spectacle. If you take that away, if you remove a club, like American clubs, I don't know if you know American sporting franchises, the LA Lakers, it's like, where are the Lakers in LA? The Utah Jazz, like, where's the Jazz in Utah? It's like, no, Utah Jazz was in New Orleans, LA Lakers was in Minnesota or Michigan. You can just move whole franchises to other locations. You completely lose the fan base. If you ever did that in football, that would really be a mortal blow. But that said, the magic of the spectacle is not going to change, and that's where my faith is and hope is.
So that will transcend.
Yeah.
Everything, all these challenges. Okay, an optimist. What did
Come
you
back
say?
to me and we can talk again if I'm still here.
Honey.
I would see it will be more modernized to a way that it makes it more exciting. I'm not against technology in football at all because it can make the game fair, more fair. Like, for example, we talk about the VAR. At the beginning, nobody liked it. But now in the stadiums, everywhere, when there is a misjudgment of a referee, everyone makes this sign. Everyone, regardless. And then they want to wait for the excitement. The referee goes to the screen. He sees the video
That's
or not.
built into the ritual
And
now,
the
see?
mics over there. It adds to the excitement.
Right.
And I feel like technology is good in that context because it makes the game fair. People are less disappointed, which is the fans, the magic of football. It's the people and the fans that are watching for their teams playing. And then it will just show that, okay, we review. It shows that there is a penalty. Here you go. So I feel technology is good. It will add value to the game, but of course not overuse anything. If you use or overuse anything, it becomes counterproductive. So it's important to have limits, to have regulations, to ensure that it's regulated well. It keeps the magic and the beautiful of the game, and to ensure that football, the essence of football and the game, what the game stands for, remains the same, which is the love of billions of people all around the world. But I can see that it's going to be more exciting, probably. Modern stadiums, we have seen in Qatar, the stadiums in Qatar, fabulous stadiums that the Qatar World Cup has built. The infrastructures are amazing. So they transform the fan experience completely. Technology, I would say. Now, artificial intelligence, for example, it reached to more fans around the world. I don't know if you have noticed the extra camera that introduced to the referee. While running in the field, he shows kind part of the excitement to the world and to the fans that's what's happening on the pitch. So you might argue, you might agree, you might disagree.
You have to bleep out what the players are telling the referee.
But it adds value, definitely. So
it also makes it feel like a video game, which actually is a big part of the reality of most football fans now.
I think technology is good if it's used properly and in moderation.
David, you were telling me off air that as you approach your 60th, you're reading the classics. So 20 years down the line, what's football going to look like, and how's that going to vibe with where you want to see the game?
20 years from now, what I see is a world that has exceeded 2 degrees centigrade. I see a world already being decisively impacted by the climate crisis, in very serious trouble. And football will not escape that. I see a world in 20 years in which football stadiums are flooded. I see a world in which it is virtually impossible to play in equatorial Africa during the day because it is simply too hot. I look at the cataclysmic disasters that are happening across the global south. And while, of course, it's not really being reported, you know that grassroots football and every pitch in Mozambique or Angola under the conditions of those floods is being swept away. And I worry what is the future for football, a game played outdoors on grass in a world that has exceeded 2 degrees centigrade. And I see an optimistic scenario and I see a pessimistic scenario. Football in and of itself is probably responsible as part of the global sports industry and alongside the sportswear industry for a couple of percentage points of global carbon emissions. Not a huge amount, you might argue, but probably, at least equivalent to Germany, and nobody's giving Germany a pass on the climate crisis. So football and sport has its work cut out to transform its carbon emissions, most of which come from the polyester that football shirts are made of and currently cannot be recycled. However, were football to actually put its climate house in order, it is a remarkable resource for climate action. In a world in which trust in elite, in scientists, and in the possibility of a hopeful future diminish every day, football remains a space in which trust continues to exist. Football is a space in which we believe that we're only as good as our weakest link, and that is an essential element of a response to the climate crisis. Football remains a space in which we really do believe that collective action matters, and in a world of such incredible individualism, that has been a major obstacle to mobilizing climate action. Above all, football is one of the last spaces in which we really believe in our hearts that last-minute turnarounds are possible. Miracles can happen. You were there at the 1999 Champions League final.
And Solskjaer has won it.
And there you go. And on the one hand, it's trivial. And on the other hand, this is one of the most precious popular cultural resources available to contemporary humanity. If football were actually to take serious climate action, the details of which are for another day, and to mobilise these precious cultural resources that are encoded in the game and are near universal on this divided planet, the possibility of a different and more optimistic and more peaceful future is there.
You guys were very, very powerful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's a perfect point at which to bring to an end this discussion. This has been a weird inversion for me because usually when the cameras are off, I talk football with guests and then the cameras switch on and then we talk about, the thing we're paid to do. And this is the first time we sort of switched on the cameras and we get to talk football. So it's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure. It's been an education. Thank you so much, Tony Karon, Hani Thaljieh, and David Goldblatt. I wish you all the best and I thank you so much for sharing your time with us here on the Doha Debates podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to see more, subscribe to the Doha Debates YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future episodes.